I am not hearing anything at the moment, no.
Mike, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now.
There we go. Ooh, so close.
Accept. I'm back.
So can we begin?
Something's not right. Yes, go ahead.
With echo?
I don't
Are
know.
we, how does it affect you guys? So when he starts talking, the echo will go in? Can we just give it a test?
Yep.
Can he talk and see if there's an echo? I don't think there will be with him.
Mike, can you say something?
I can definitely hear the echo, but are you able to hear me still?
A test.
Yeah.
Mike, can you hear me? It's
I
Mayor
can.
Nancy. Okay,
I can hear you, yes.
but can you also hear the echo or no?
There's no more echo.
Okay. I wonder, Lindsay, can you just turn your volume down on your personal computer? I see. Okay. Testing, Mike, can we try again?
You bet. How does it sound now?
Okay. I think we are close to mission critical launch. Okay. Give me 1 second. So we just took a pause for technical difficulties. We are back live streaming the meeting. All right. So for anyone who was watching or had taken a break due to some technical challenges, we are now back online and we have the pleasure of hearing from Mr. Mike Bly in regards to the 2025 Asset Management Plan, and we will cross our fingers that all will go well. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bly. I know we've been anticipating this presentation for some time. I think you're going to give us a lot of information. So if you don't mind, I might ask at certain points if my council colleagues have any questions. I think that may be an easier way to go versus waiting till the end. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine. You bet.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll let you get started.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for fitting me into your schedule. I know it's been tough to get this one incorporated into your guys' meeting schedules and obviously very, very busy. So appreciate the invite and the time. So the presentation tonight is to go over to just present the high level highlights of the 2025 AMP. We won't dive into the details. It's a close to 200-page report, and we probably don't want to do that in a session like this. So the intent is to show the highlights, provide an update during the time we have. So just quickly, so this project was to develop and deliver a 2025 OREG compliant asset management plan. Key contributors from North Grenville staff were certainly Roger Doherty and Carly Wheeler, who were heavily involved over the past 15 months, and also other departmental staff as we worked through workshops and discussions and data work and surveys, and council as well for taking the time to engage in a survey with us to help us better understand your view on service levels. So why do we do asset management? What are we here for? Why are we developing these asset management plans? Well, this whole process is about developing a program or processes within our municipalities to really understand the infrastructure that you own and you maintain. So understanding the services that those assets provide And it is also a way to ensure accountability to residents and stakeholders for the services that they are being provided and that they use. And when we think about these service levels, really there's three key pieces that as a council, as an administration, as a municipality, you're trying to balance. That is the cost, performance, and risk of any asset, right? These municipalities exist to provide a service, and that comes at a cost, right? And so where we invest more, perhaps we decrease risk. Where we invest less, perhaps we increase the risk, and performance may degrade with it. So this is a coordinated activity to realize the value of the assets that you currently have. So OREG 588.17, we're all familiar, maybe perhaps familiar with the Ontario regulation, which has been in place over the past few years. This piece, the 2025 AMP, as delivered tonight, is the final piece towards compliance with the OREG 588 requirements. And this piece builds off the 2024 AMP that you guys had done in-house and takes the current levels of service, and we start talking about proposed levels of service. So understanding where the service levels are today and what do we need moving into the future, and what is that desired future state. So what comes next? So after the 2025 requirements with this AMP, with the adoption of this AMP, you'd be considered compliant from an AMP standpoint with OREG. All that's left to do is, of course, is to adopt the plan. Once the plan is published and public facing, and assuming that there's a current asset management policy in place, the town, or pardon me, not township, municipality would be considered compliant with the OREG requirements. And this is definitely important. It's an important milestone as moving forward. When you guys look forward to funding opportunities that may be out there, this will become a key requirement within those applications. So tonight, what do we look at? We'll do a quick overview of the current state of the infrastructure. What process improvements can increase confidence analysis and decision making? Generally, we'll talk about that as we're talking about this information and this data and the process. Then, of course, at the end of this, we look at what is the financial capacity? What are the investment needs moving forward? It's important to note that this AMP is based on a 2024 year end. We started this in March of 2025. And so at some point we have to do a data cutoff and say we're going to go from this point. And so this doesn't include any new acquisitions, new assets within 2025 or 2026. So the current state of the infrastructure, where are you at as of that 2024 year end? Because we know there's been substantial investments made in the past, 2 years, year and a half. So as of that year end, the total value, replacement value of the asset portfolio, $578 million, with your facilities making up a large piece of that, followed closely by the road network. Those two asset categories making up almost 50%, or just over 50% of the replacement value. So, pardon me. It's important to understand where do these replacement costs come from? How do we define these? Well, in this case, for North Grenville, this is a very good news story where we look at every asset category has primarily user-defined costs. What this means is we're not relying on the inflation of historical values, which often misstates or undervalues assets. So across the board, you have user-defined costs, which means staff have gone out, whether it be through tender, whether it be through quotes, whether it be through recent project or construction costs, and got current day values for these asset categories. So you can have a high level of confidence in those values. What condition is it in? So overall, this is the entire portfolio at a glance. Overall, 71% of the assets, pardon me, are considered to be in fair or better condition. That is also a very good news story. And you see 43% in fair, 24% in good, and 3 sitting in that very good range. It's important to note this is replacement cost weighted when we look at this. So those assets with a higher value carry a higher weight. At the end of the day, it is about the value and the cost behind these assets. So breaking this down across each asset category, this graph shows the breakdown across each category in very poor to very good, and the values associated with them. And again, we look at 71% being in fair or better condition. The good news here is you don't see a lot of those red lines in the graph showing up, which means you've got good solid condition assessments, you got good maintenance programs, or you've got a lot of assets with high values that are fairly young in their service life. So those condition values, I meant on the previous slide, 99% of these assets have assessed condition, which is fantastic. I don't see that very often. It's actually quite rare. And what that means is that these assets have received a formal assessment. Somebody's looked at them, someone's touched them, someone's inspected them and said, this is the current level of performance this asset or this condition this asset is in. It's not just going based on age, which we see quite a bit of, where an asset is put into service, it's given an EUL, an expected useful life, or an estimated useful life. And of course, as it ages, it's considered to be in poor condition. Well, we know that may not be fair to the asset and the performance because we maintain these assets. We invest in them, we do rehabs, we do renewals, etc. And so you can have confidence in the condition, that condition value that is presented there. So when we look at the financial side and we look at our annual requirements and what's required over the coming years, there's two different ways to look at these values or these strategies, I guess. One is end of life scenario or replacement only. And so we look at that and we say an asset's put into service, it's given a 20-year life, and we're not going to do anything, right? At 20 years, it gets replaced and on we go. There's no interventions to extend that life or adjust it in any way. And then there's life cycle strategies. A really common and good example of this is within our road networks, where there are strategies put in place where overlays will be done, mill and pave events will be done, crack sealing, etc. All these events that operations carries out on these roads work to extend the life, improve the condition of that asset. So two different ways to look at these replacements, or the financial requirements. Oops, sorry. And this slide, sorry, I missed it as I was speaking to. This is just a high-level example of what that might look like within your software, right? Where you see an asset put into service, and the curve on the very left side would say, well, it's going to last 20 years, and that's it. But above that, you see this up and down of the graph where an asset deteriorates, we intervene with an activity, an event, and the condition increases, and then we start again. And eventually, we've extended that from a 20-year asset to a 60-year asset with these interventions. So forecasted capital requirements. This graph has a lot going on, and it's over a 75-year period. And we look this far out, not that we can realistically estimate or predict what we'll need in 75 years, but we look at this so we ensure that we've captured at least one full life cycle of your longest lived assets, right? So pipes are a good example of that. Your underground pipes, they can last 75 plus years. And so we run this to show that full life cycle in play to this graph. And so when we look at this, on average, your average annual requirement is $15.1 million. So that means on an annual basis, the municipality should be putting aside reserves, direct capital spend, $15 million to be able to fund the replacements and these activities as they come due. So we see here over this time period a couple of bigger spikes. Within the next 15 to 20 years, you see $103 million investment. And then 30 years after that, you see $125 million investment. And this is an opportunity when we look at these graphs to look at the data and go, what are these events? And start reviewing those strategies. Is this actual strategy we're going to employ? Are these estimated useful lives accurate? Because this is based on that, right? It's based on the estimated useful life plus any planned capital interventions, that life cycle strategy that may be in place. And you see primarily in this graph, a large portion of that value attributed to the facilities assets. So reinvestment rates, what should we be investing in each asset category based on the current?
Mr. Bly, I am going to stop you there.
Okay.
The Deputy Mayor has a question. Of
Sure.
course, you can appreciate the enormity of the task you've undertook and we're doing our best to absorb the information. So I'm going to recognize Deputy Mayor. Thank you. And anyone else who would like to
Yeah,
speak.
thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Bly, and I hesitated jumping in right here and stopping you, but I thought this might be the place to ask my question. And if it's not, I'm happy to ask it at the end of your presentation. But I agree with the mayor. This is a huge amount of data to swallow, and I thank you for your work, and I thank Mr. Doherty and Ms. Wheeler for, I guess, taking the 4 years, because we initiated this whole process back in 2022, and I guess Mr. Doherty remembers the beginning, and it's good to hear some positive results. But from what I understand from reading your report is, and we're talking now about investment rates, that the target investment rate is suggested to be 2.6%, but our actual investment rate is 0.69%. And I know at the end of your report, you've got recommendations and considerations, one of which is raising taxes 2.4% to close that gap if we want to reach our target investment in infrastructure. So after this report is delivered, is there a timeline that you'd suggest to bring us from 0.69% investment to 2.6% investment? I mean, is this what? I know we are now going to review this asset management plan annually, and we're at the final stages of having our first complete asset management plan. But now we have to start thinking about how, from what I presume, we're going to move from 0.69% investment to 2.6% investment. Can you comment? Thanks.
So the question is around the timeline to get to that 2.6%.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a couple of slides that kind of speak to that a little bit later on, but to speak to it now, the recommendation is that is it 2.6 or 2.4? That percentage increase over a 15-year period, right? So it's 2.4 each year, and obviously that compounds as that grows. But a 15-year period for the tax-funded assets, and a 20-year period for the rate-funded assets, which is a different percentage. And of course, rates, not taxes. But
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? I did want to ask a question, Mr. Bly, because I think it's material to Deputy Mayor's intervention. We know that there's been a major shift in asset management for municipalities in Ontario through the new legislation, which now compels municipalities to account for not just core, but non-core asset groups, and also anticipate the full life cycle of an asset, as well as ensure that there is, to the best degree possible, accurate costing for the replacement of that asset. And I'm just curious to know, in reconciling core asset groups with non-core asset groups, I think what we might acknowledge is that some of those non-core asset groups, maybe they're retired, or maybe they're entirely replaced because new funding becomes available from a different level of government, and therefore the burden to replace a non-core asset is assumed in part through collaboration with other levels of government, which is something we've tried very hard to do in this municipality, is capitalize on external granting opportunities. So when I see proposed tax rate increases, and we can talk about those later, I'm not clear on how, many municipalities are able to capitalize on external funding. Many municipalities and municipal councils make decisions about non-core assets over time that would affect the calculations around how many assets do we have to take care of, at what level of service, and given anticipated life cycles. So I understand the legislation in Ontario has changed dramatically so that there's a much fuller and complete picture. but it doesn't seem to anticipate the relationship municipality might have to some of those non-core assets. So in that respect, I just wonder, it may be a full picture in this moment, but I'm not sure it can anticipate the future of the fate of some of those, particularly non-core assets. We know we're very unlikely to decommission a road, right? Or take a bridge out of service for obvious reasons. But some of the other facilities we have, for lots of different reasons, may not remain in their current form because there may be other opportunities to acquire assets or to secure funding that will help to offset the costs of whatever the fate is for that particular non-core asset. So it seems to me that, yes, we take a picture in this moment, but it doesn't always feel like it's an accurate picture because we don't know what 5 or 10 years or even 2 years down the road may bring. Is there a possibility that you could comment on that?
I mean, I think you highlight a real challenge, right? When it comes to the funding side of things, you know, when we look at these financial strategies, we include those external funding, you know, the grant funding that's considered sustainable, as OREG guidelines suggest, right? So those long-term senior government. But outside of that, our recommendations always include, you know, if there's other funding opportunities that come up, you know, go after them, use them, and strategically where you can, right, to reduce the burden of rate increases. Right now, we have to assume those opportunities aren't there because we don't know what they are and what they will be. There's no way to predict that. As facilities, or not facilities, but non-core assets such as facilities, if there is plans to decommission, to retire, you know, that's where this process is not a one and done. It is a snapshot, but it's a constant refinement of information, right? As those plans are made and we say, you know, this facility is going to be decommissioned in 5 years. Within this database that you have, you put, this is not planned for replacement. We pull those values out. We're no longer planning to do anything to that. It'll just be decommissioned. That comes at a cost, of course, that you would then have to include. And the collaboration between municipalities, absolutely critical, I think. I don't think it's been talked about enough. I can't speak to it from a strategy or from a like examples and provide, you know, examples of how that's working and finances, but I don't know if that addresses your comment or.
No, I appreciate it. I just think it's important for myself and council colleagues, as well as the public, to understand the way in which we're taking account of assets is remarkably different than it was a couple of years ago. This municipality has been known to be fairly proactive in terms of some of the early efforts around asset management, you know, secured funding from FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We've had Mr. Doherty with us for a number of years, and he's been wonderful at supporting, I think, the efforts around asset management. But this plan, I think, certainly because it's required by the Government of Ontario, represents a market difference in terms of how municipalities account for current assets, because it incorporates assumptions about service levels. It looks at life cycle, full, and the replacement, right, once the life cycle of a particular asset is complete. So, you know, these numbers in the hundreds of millions for anyone watching may feel genuinely surprising. How is it that this kind of data hasn't been available to us before? How is it that councils, not just currently, but in the past, didn't, you know, recognize how important it was to anticipate life cycle replacement and what have you? But clearly the Government of Ontario has made a decision to really ensure that municipalities have the most complete picture possible. I just think it includes assumptions about non-core assets that may or may not be accurate, because to your point, it's a moment in time, and things change. Bell Hall might be an example of that. We've decided as a municipality to take into account to repossess an asset that wasn't ours, and we're spending significant dollars to turn it into something. So that, you know, that changes the asset picture. I just feel, and I will stop here because this is more certainly about you, not about me. It's a very dynamic landscape, right? So the way in which we talk about the asset management plan obviously can't anticipate all of how council's staff come to terms with some of the realities of those assets down the road, or opportunities to secure funding from other levels of government, which reduces the tax burden. So maybe I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, so we talked about the outlook, and then we look at these reinvestment rates, which I think triggered this conversation. When we talk about that investment rate or that the recommended increase to taxes and rates, we look at this, we break it down, and this is what contributes to that value, right? So of that overall increase, this is how it breaks down across the different categories, and it shows what is that target reinvestment rate. So this is based on our estimated replacement dates. Like, if we say it's going to last 25 years, what do we need to have by year 25 to replace that? Assuming, of course, that we would. And of course, that is these AMPs I'll just mention, they're a living document. Like you say, they're dynamic. The assets are coming and going. Things are changing. Strategies are changing. We adjust. There's funding that comes in. There's different strategies that come into play. So it's about constant refinement of this. And this gives the tool to be able to put in that information and try to keep those numbers as accurate and current and relevant as possible. And so here you see across the board in the blue, the target investment rates for each asset category. And in the gray boxes there are the actual current investment rates that are happening right now, based on, I believe, 2024 capital allocation. So some categories are very close, and some categories have quite a spread. Now, remember, this is also a snapshot in time. This doesn't mean that investments have not been made. It just means in that 3-year window that we looked at, maybe there wasn't major investments made in that particular asset category. So again, understanding what feeds into this information and looking at that a little more in detail is valuable. So the proposed level of service. So this 2025 is about including proposed levels of service. There is no structure or regulation doesn't say how you must define this. So we look at what are the current levels of service today. So we're looking at what is the current condition, the performance, the risk, the investment, how much are we investing, how much do we need to be investing, right? The proposed level of service is looking toward the future. What do we need to be investing? Are we willing to take that step to that investment level? Do we want to set condition targets? Do we want to, maybe there's levels of service that we want to decrease so we can invest in other more higher priority areas. So again, the OREG doesn't dictate what the metrics must be and what you should strive for. It's very specific to community needs and level and capacity, whether that be resources, whether it be financial staff, etc. Right? So how do we try to gauge this? In the case of Grenville, North Grenville, of course, we held workshops with staff to look at, here's how your asset categories are currently performing. And really, it's getting their perspective to say, to understand, are these asset categories performing well enough? They are or they aren't. Are they excelling? Do they need improvement? And if they need improvement and there's a higher level of service desired, how do you get there? Is it a financial investment that's needed? Is it resources in terms of people, equipment, etc., things like that, right? So trying to get us an idea of that landscape and that perception that staff have. They're the most intimate with these assets on a daily basis. Of course, then we did a council engagement with a survey to try and engage council's view on service levels, and from the position that you sit in, how is the municipality doing, and where do you feel improvements need to be made? So there's a couple of different approaches we can take. In this case, we took a financial approach. We looked at what are our current funding levels. So we review that and we look, whoops, jumped on me. How are we currently doing? So based on the annual requirement that we calculate, how are we doing? What is that deficit? So that you can look at this from a financial perspective. And in this case, I believe Grenville is funded at 26% of their annual requirement, right? So that's a lower percentage. I can't give you an exact average, but we see 30 to 40% is kind of the norm that we're seeing a lot of, right? So 24% funded being a little bit on the lower side. You guys have a substantial asset portfolio. And so we look at, well, first we need to look at getting our funding up. So before we start setting condition targets. And this leads us into a conversation, not for this presentation, but a very strategic conversation around that life cycle planning, right? Looking at each of these asset categories in depth, what is our plan for them? And then you can really start honing in on the investment that's needed. So in this case, we looked at three different scenarios, three different fundings or financial scenarios, funding scenarios. 100% funding being the ideal, of course, 75% funding level and a 50% funding level. Pardon me. And so we looked at this over 15 and 20 years, 15 years for the tax funded assets and 20 years for the rate funded assets. The reason for the 15 and 20 is just when we do the calculations and we look at what is the percentage increases required over that timeline, the 15 and 20 seemed reasonable given the higher percentages we were looking at. And so what are the pros to each of these? Well, of course, 100% funding, you're on that path to full funding for your infrastructure, right? That's going to be a moving target as costs change, as assets come and go. Gradual rate increases, we're not doing this tomorrow, we're doing this over a period of time. And you're on that clear path to achieving full funding. On the drawbacks, of course, are a higher long-term financial burden. It's a higher rate increase over a longer period of time. As we look at longer periods of time, it takes the delay in getting that funding levels up, we see asset renewal and deferrals increase, or sorry, asset deferrals decrease without being able to do asset renewals, or deferrals increase, renewals. So we see a backlog increase, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And of course, with the lower funding levels, they become more manageable from a rate increase perspective or a tax rate increase perspective. The 75% would provide a moderate balance between service delivery and financial feasibility, right? We're decreasing the burden on the ratepayers and the taxpayers. Of course, that delays any renewals and replacements with less funding. And as we have less funding available, of course, that increases the reliance on grants. And as we decrease even more for at a 50% level, that reliance on grants and it becomes heavier and heavier. And of course, future funding becomes more and more uncertain. So for each one of these asset categories, we model this out to get a sense of what does this look like. And here on this graph, you see the three different lines and four different bullet points there. So your starting condition today for the road network is just under 60% condition. If you were to, as you achieve 100% funding, which is about 3.4 million a year, you see that you maintain a higher average around that 60, low 60s average condition over this 75-year time period, right? Of course, as we would expect with a lesser investment, 75% and 50%, you see those projected conditions decrease. So that service level decreasing with lesser investment, less renewals, less interventions.
Mr. Bly, can I just ask one other question, and I'll ask my council colleagues if they have any questions? You know, when we were looking at replacing upgrading, expanding, rehabilitating our sewage treatment plant 3 years ago, I don't think we would have understood that there was close to $50 million on the table from the government of Ontario to support the replacement expansion, not replacement, expansion of that asset. So obviously, because the asset became more expensive to expand than we understood with inflation and COVID and what have you, there was a scenario in which there had been lower costs envisioned for the project. But at the same time, another development in the planning for that particular project is that we were able to secure $49 million because the government of Ontario, through two different tranches of funding, was able to make financial support available to this municipality, as they have many others. So when we game out these scenarios of target funding, is it 100%, is it 75%, is it 50%, is there any consideration for the external funding landscape, or is the only assumption that the municipality is paying its way 100% all of the time? Because that obviously affects the choice point, right? We effectively will have over half of this plant paid for, or over the costs of the plant are now such that the government of Ontario is effectively absorbing 50% of those costs. I have a feeling that's not contemplated in the asset management framework. And I totally understand why. How would you know? How could we predict? But I think it's important. It's an important consideration. We're sitting in a building that, in fact, enjoyed considerable federal funding support to the tune of up to $17 million. So these larger capital projects tend to be ones where there is external funding. And I just wonder if there's a way to incorporate or acknowledge that municipalities for certain projects rarely do it alone. They are relying on external funding opportunities from higher levels of government.
Yeah, and my comment to that is absolutely, we assume that there will be funding opportunities in the future. I mean, we just don't know what they are. And they can come and go. They could be one time. You get a one-time $50 million grant, and then you don't see a grant like that for decades, right? So it's really hard to predict what those external funding sources can be. So the goal of the OREG and these AMPs is to put the municipalities on that sustainable funding path, knowing full well there will be those opportunities that come along. We just don't know when and where and how much. But throwing out the word sustainability, you're on that sustainable path towards that full funding. And these adjustments get made as you go along. As these opportunities come up, you make these adjustments to these plans, right? These AMPs, we would recommend looking at these numbers every year, right? Things change. And if you're getting an injection of funding over the next couple of years, factor that into your calculations. Yeah.
Thank you. I just have Deputy Mayor also wanting to ask a question.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor, to you, Mr. Bly. Referring to the Mayor's last comment about the unpredictability of external funding and how that might weigh in terms of interpreting this data, which is based on 100% internal or municipal funding, is it possible to look at past performance? Say we have data over the last 4 years and the amount of external funding we've received, take an average, and then you can say to these numbers plus or minus a certain percent. Is past performance possibly an indication of what future grants, or just eliminate the guesswork of future funding from other levels of government? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. When it comes to OREG and being compliant, the plan, you can only take into account those long-term sustainable funding sources. So your OCIF and your CCBF and long-term grants like that. And we do look at that. We do include those. We assume those values into these projections. We assume them at today's value, though. We don't apply any inflation to assume that, if you're getting $2.5 million in funding today, that we don't know what that's going to inflate to. But I think to be compliant with OREG, we don't take into account any of those, past grants, even if, one-time, 2-year grants, et cetera, right? They're not considered sustainable by definition of OREG. But I would say internally, you could look at that history. Internally, it's all internal, but outside of the OREG compliant AMP, look at those numbers and see. But there's only so many assumptions you can make. For Northern Municipality, there's a NORDS funding that actually just got announced to be permanent. But prior to that, it's a 5-year program. So that's a 5-year history of that funding being there. But after year 5, it was to be cut off. So you just don't know, I guess, the long-term picture of those sources.
Thank you. So I do understand that we're trying to comply with Ontario regulation, but for our own purposes, it might be a metric we could use just to give us some wiggle room, I guess.
Any other questions, colleagues, on this point? No? Okay. Oh, Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did just want to address to council, just when we're looking at capital funding, So with prior years and those trends on grants receivables, donations, sale of assets, those are all looked at for income when we're financing our capital. So what the asset management plan does is it does take into consideration those past trends, but when we're looking at the in the next couple slides, Mr. Bly will touch on the annual capital requirement. So when we're looking at the tax levy, then their calculations of past performances on taxation requirement does factor in grants, and like I said, the other sources of revenue, just because with the capital purchases that we have, a lot of them without the grants wouldn't have been made. But once that asset is purchased, then we also have to look at the cost of maintaining and rehabilitating that asset. So when we narrow down on the tax levy itself, then it is a comparator that does have those other revenue sources, because when we're looking at the percentage, so scenario 1, 100% realistically, no. 100% funding on the tax levy. So that 2.4% annual tax increase, because our tax revenue is our most consistent comparable year to year. So because that rate is directly coming from the ratepayers, it cannot fluctuate, as you all are well aware, like grant revenue can, right? So because we're just applying for this grant and that grant, but we always keep in mind of the tax. So that's why when we're projecting with our asset management plan, it's a snapshot of, okay, this is our taxes that we've been able to fund. So you'll see that it's the funding available on the taxation side. And then that is what we can look at when we're budgeting going forward. And of course, as Madam Mayor Peckford mentioned, it does need to include the core as well as the non-core assets. It's not going to include the assets that that we will be acquiring, and it doesn't include the assets that we are going to be disposing of. So again, the asset management plan, so this is for 2025, is more acts like a guideline. So I just wanted council to be aware of that financing part of it and what we look at.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wheeler. Might I ask, like, I reflect on Riverside Park as an asset that, as a council and staff, we opted to rehabilitate and expand significantly. So Riverside Park, one of our largest parks, oldest parks, was languishing. And one of the reasons we invested in that park was because of development charges, because of growth in the community. I don't see a lot of references to how a growing tax base helps to offset some of the investments we're making. Think of the Armory building and the $400,000 that was invested in that to create more capacity and more usability in the building, which in turn does generate a little more in user fees. Of course, I don't think that many municipal assets, if not all of them, are heavily subsidized. But the growth piece, I don't see fully captured here. We know that we only are able to invest in certain assets to the extent that we do, right, by adding features like an outdoor rink or a splash pad or a walking path, because the community is growing. So how is growth calculated in the calculations about what's funded through the tax base? And maybe that's more for Mr. Bly than it is Ms. Wheeler, but it's very relevant because I don't think council would feel confident in, for example, investing in a transit system, which may or may, I don't know how it's understood in the asset classes of the municipality, or if it's considered more operating than capital, but the vehicles themselves, I expect would be implicated. All of these things are done with an understanding that we're growing, and that growth in some cases has offset, I think, a need to raise taxes more than we might otherwise, right? If we didn't have that kind of growth. Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Bly or Ms. Wheeler, you want to take that on?
I can try to speak to a little bit just from this project's perspective, where when we discuss growth doesn't factor. It definitely factors into future investments and future services and so on. These numbers don't take into account growth. When it comes to incorporating growth into these strategies, it's a much more complex task or project that I think is very important to do, especially for a municipality like yourselves, with the growth that you are seeing. It's trying to understand, like, how accurate can we predict how much growth we're going to have? What is that cost going to be? What is that extra demand on services going to be? And so, no, it doesn't. It's not calculated into these calculations for this plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bly. That's helpful. We're just, I think, trying to grasp the context in which plans like this are developed so that we have our best understanding of what's at play and what's at stake. Thank you.
Okay, so this next slide then is, as Carly kind of alluded to, shows the annual capital requirements and the associated and the funding available and the associated deficit. So when we look at the three main categories that we're looking at, so tax funded assets, which is everything except for sanitary and water, an annual capital requirement just under $11.9 million. Current funding available or allocated based on the past is $2.7 million. So an annual capital deficit of around $9.2 million, so being 22% funded. We see the same, similar, of course, in sanitary, a 1.7 annual capital requirement, 367,000 currently being made available for capital, leaving a $1.2 million deficit. 1.5 capital requirement for water, current funding available for capital, 933,000, a capital deficit of 756,000 being funded at 61%. So overall, across all assets, that 26% funding level. So again, $15.1 million capital requirement, currently just under 4 million being allocated, leaving a $11.1 million capital deficit. So how do we achieve this proposed level of service, these scenarios that we've been discussing? So here's those increases that were brought up earlier. So to achieve a 100% funding position in 15 years, based on today's values, today's strategies, and today's asset portfolio, a 2.4% annual tax increase. A 75% scenario would be a 1.7, and scenario 3 would be, being 50%, would be a 0.9% increase on taxes. On the rate side, we look at a 20-year time period, just because the percentages are higher. So scenario 1 at 100% for wastewater would be a 3.4, water 3.3, 75% would be 3.1 and 2.4 respectively, water and wastewater, and then scenario 3 would be a 2.7 and 1.4% increase if a 50% target was desirable. And as it mentions here, and we've talked around this a little bit, where both sustainable one-time grant transfers will continue to be essential for a source of revenue for investment in capital infrastructure. We know that absolutely. As those grants become available, take advantage of them. Understand, if they're one-time grants, that injection of revenue, acquisition of a new asset, what are the life cycle costs of that, right? Usually the upfront purchase and development and construction is a very small percentage of the overall life cycle cost. Okay, this slide here is just to compare what those look like for actual allocation. So looking at your 2025 your allocation is we say 1.5 million. This does not take into account grant funding at this moment. It's just strictly tax allocation. So in 2025, you gave just 1.5 million. 2026, 1.1. Under 100% scenario, 100% funding scenario, in 2027, you would, if that were to take place, there'd be 1.9 million available. If it was a 75% funding, 1.8, and 50% funding, 1.6. I think it's important to look at these, at the actual dollar values. Sometimes we see bigger percentages, and it can be a bit of a, an alarm to see a higher percentage. But when we look at the actual dollars that equates to, sometimes it's a little easier to digest or communicate, I guess. So this is just to show that comparison of in year one of this strategy, being 2027, the allocation that would be available.
Mr. Bly, if I could just ask one other question about your previous slide. Thank you. And of course, it would be up to a forthcoming council to ultimately weigh in on a tax rate increase. I mean, these are suggestions for how the revenue can be collected based upon an understanding by the municipality and the council of the day, I presume in 2027, to look at what they want to fund or which scenario is optimal for them. But just to be clear, based upon previous questions, the proposed annual tax rate increase, and again, not the purview of this outgoing council to weigh in on that when it comes to a 2027 budget. But I appreciate the presentation of the scenarios. But say scenario 2 is what a forthcoming council would land on. The 1.7% tax rate increase as proposed, as I heard you say, doesn't take into account calculations of growth in the tax base. So it's possible that 1.7 could be picked up by growth, in which case it wouldn't necessarily need to be imposed on the full tax base, because as we welcome new residents, we have a growing tax base. So I just want to understand that I've apprehended this correctly. And the other thing I just want to ask is that 1.7% in scenario 2, or if it was 2.4 in scenario 1, doesn't contemplate the external granting landscape either. This is if nothing changed, if no one else moved to North Granville, if we didn't avail of some external granting opportunities, which of course, to Ms. Wheeler's point, are, they come and they go, there's not a lot of predictability, but nonetheless, we've been fairly successful. These numbers don't take into account those two externalities, growth and external grants. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so looking at this slide here, this is the tax funded assets. And so this is just simply to just show a visual, of that steady increase over the planning period. So that 15-year period, 2027 to 2041, with that increase hitting that $11.9 million average annual requirement over that period of time. Now, there's a note there, there's going to be years in any asset category where you may not have any capital projects. You may not have the need for a replacement or what have you. But it's important that allocation, that annual requirements still be put into that reserve, right? It's planning for that next life cycle event, that next replacement, and even those unexpecteds that, may come up. So saying that in those years where there's no capital needs, we just don't save anything. That's not the intent of this. So here, this is an interesting one. It's actually the first time I've run into presenting this slide in this format. So what you see here is for the rate funded assets, right? So similar to the previous slide, we're showing that planning period, and we're showing that rate increase and achieving that desired annual average annual requirement, that 100% funding level. In your case, we've heard a little bit here and there about the wastewater treatment plant and that expansion and that cost. One thing we do take into account in this financial strategy is, of course, debt reallocation and future debt. If we can predict future debt accurately enough. So in this case, with the debt that's being taken on to fund the wastewater treatment plant, we see this dip down into the negative there, where that debt is presumably repaid through this capital allocation. And then, of course, as that debt's paid off, we tip back into the positive, and then we're on track to that, reaching that average annual requirement. So just showing that these calculations do account for that debt that's going to be assumed. Okay. So that brings me to the recommendations. That's a really high level. If you haven't read the AMP, I encourage you to try to dive into it and digest the details that are in there. And so, of course, recommendations, financial strategies. Review the feasibility of adopting this full funding scenario to achieve that proposed level of service. Review and adjust the financial strategy based on future rate studies, development charge studies, and strategic documents like that, or studies that you have completed. Asset inventory, of course, continuing to regularly update this data with accurate costs, today's costs. When you have significant replacements, the wastewater treatment plant being one of those, once that is complete and those costs are understood, getting that information in there, revising the numbers and having a look at what the calculations are at that point in time, it obviously will change. We've talked about life cycle strategies and risk a little bit. The life cycle strategies are key to these calculations, right? Understand, develop that plan, 10 years, 20 years, what are the key activities that we plan to do? What is our strategy for maintenance? What is our strategy for renewal, et cetera? Building those models so that these projections and calculations are as accurate as they can be. And obviously that'll provide much more and more value as that data matures. Once the wastewater treatment plant is online, integrating and understanding the full life cycle impacts, right? It was kind of mentioned that it's one thing to buy the asset, then you have the life cycle costs, right? And that accounts for 80% of the value over the term of that life, or the life of that asset. So understanding what is the additional funding required, what are the additional resources, et cetera. So, and we've talked about this too, where this process is a continuous improvement process. It's ongoing. It's never done. These AMPs are living documents. The data is constantly being changed, refined, updated. So we should be looking at this information on a very regular basis and understanding it, and not just putting it on the shelf and 5 years, 10 years we look at it and there's a big update to do. So, and ideally, as the data matures and the confidence increases in these values, that this information is informing your yearly capital budgets. And also we talk about continuous assessment of assets, constantly be looking at these assets, doing these performance assessments and condition assessments, and keeping up to date with the performance and understanding how assets are doing. So next steps, of course, review and consider the findings of this AMP in your future budget deliberations. Hopefully this document provides value and informs those conversations. Consider what supports administration may need to continue strengthening confidence in asset management planning, right? Whether, is it staffing, is it condition assessments, is it studies that you need done to more information to help inform? Do you need external third parties to help with some of that? And develop a process for regular review and tracking of asset management progress, including reporting to council. So getting together with administration and council on a regular basis and having this conversation specifically about asset management, understanding the numbers, the life cycles, the conditions, and the performance of these assets. And when it comes to OREG requirements, the bulk of it's done with the last 3 iterations of these AMPs, but the next iteration is due 5 years after the adoption of the 2025 AMP. So in 2031, Granville will be required to provide an updated asset management plan, and an annual review is required, well, obviously annually, by July 1st of every year. So an annual review, as required by OREG, is really, it's not extensive, or certainly not has to be too lengthy, but it's really a check-in on how are you doing, looking at these levels of service, looking at your investment. Are you on track? What are your challenges? What are the blockades, the walls, et cetera, that you're running into that, or maybe you can't achieve that level of funding, or whatever targets you have set. So just basically a check-in to see how you're doing on that process. With that, that brings me to the conclusion of this presentation. I'm certainly welcome to any questions you may have, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Bly. So I see Deputy Mayor and Councillor Sullivan. So we'll start there and see how it goes. All right, go ahead.
I think Deputy Mayor is suggesting I go ahead.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Bly, thank you for your presentation. I think asset management is a very appropriate, great process to have in place, and something that personally I've tried to do all my life, but my father would be very happy about that. When you talk about in your presentation land improvements, I'm not sure exactly what all that includes. Is that parks, for example, and any landscaping or any assets that are in the parks, like play structures, that sort of thing in parks? So that's my first question.
Yeah, typically land improvements are exactly that. Your parks, playgrounds, your sports fields and courts, fencing, hard landscaping, and items like that.
Okay, thank you. So then the next question is regarding natural assets. So for example, within the last 10 to 14 days, there's probably been tens of thousands of dollars worth of trees planted on County Road 43, and it all looks absolutely amazing, and there's a lot of positive feedback in the community about it. Now, these trees are all paid for with tax dollars, and so outside of the warranty period, how do you suggest they become part of the asset management plans in terms of care and maintenance and replacement as needed for these very valuable natural assets that we've all paid for?
Mr. Bly?
Yeah. Yeah, natural assets is definitely something that's next on the, it's in sight for everybody. And I don't know if I could answer that in this session, but to place value on these natural assets, there's so many different ways to go about it. And it's quite an in-depth conversation about how you want to value a tree, and how do you account for the maintenance, and when does that asset actually start to provide value. And so I guess I don't have a real good answer, I suppose, right now, but definitely I would look at natural assets by themselves, I guess, if that makes sense. But to answer your question about how to value it, that's a much deeper conversation, I'm sure.
Okay, I'm just going to see if Dunlop would like to also add. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to the County Road 43 project and the trees that are, and all the landscaping, typical in regards to contract process, and we've been informed by the county that the existing trees will be maintained and a warranty will be provided for 2 years. At that point in time, they will be turned over to the relevant level of government, be it us or be it the United Counties. How we go about maintaining that, County Road 43 will provide a lot of municipal and county assets that have yet, because we have not assumed those assets. But once we have, they will be accounted for in our asset management plan as they're transferred over. So in a couple of years, we will own a lot of trees, as will the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville, and we will need to start maintaining those trees, as well as the multi-use paths, as well as the lights, as well as the benches and the various other assets from a municipal level that we will have to have in our next version of our asset management plan.
Councillor Sullivan, follow up?
Thank you. That's good to hear, because I think proactively, we know that there were trees planted down Wellington Road with the reconstruction there, and they've died and they're still there, like twigs. But so if this asset management plan is for 5 years before it's redone, So 5 years from now, what happens if some of those trees out there have died between the 2-year warranty and the next asset management plan? Like, do we have any plan for the money that we'll take to replace those trees?
Who would speak to that? Oh, Mr. Doherty, thank you. Go ahead.
Councillor Sullivan, through Madam Mayor, yeah, we're just in the works of starting that next phase. I've done a lot of training in the last few months on natural assets, and you wouldn't believe the amount of information that's out there. We're right in the middle of setting up a template on our iPads so we can go out and actually pinpoint all our trees. So we're starting with facilities and parks. Wellington's an interesting one because I have all those assets listed. Now I have to go visit and see what's going on over there. Yeah, I'd love to go out for a field trip. That'd be great. Try our new tool out. But yeah, it's definitely on our track, and I'd like to have by the end of the year have a report on where we're at and with our natural assets. It's pretty exciting. We got a lot of value out there, and we want to know where we're at. In conjunction with that, we have another project going on with, I call our forest, with Algonquin College. So I've been on a couple meetings so far with that, and if that takes off, we'll actually know where First and Forest stands as far as what's there, and also the campus forest, which is exciting. They want to do limerick forest too. I like to know that, but that's not part of our assets. But those are. There's another forest down at South Gore Parks that I'd like to know about. It's sitting in the middle, and so I've asked, like, we'll get an idea. They're going to use satellite imagery that's like out of this world to pinpoint and species. They're going to put boots on the ground and do some of this work. So it's pretty exciting. So I hope they get started right away before fall. Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah. So yeah, actually the tool that we have, we're going out and checking these natural assets trees. We're fine tuning it tomorrow. So we get it working. I'll be out in the field next week. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty, and thank you, CAO Dunlop.
Indeed, it sounds very exciting, and there's lots to learn. So thank you to Mr. Doherty for his enthusiasm, and I'm sure the picture will be that much clearer by the end of the year, hopefully. Okay, I'll go to Deputy Mayor, I believe, and then Councillor Strachan and Councillor Wilson. Did I see both your hands? Okay, so we'll go to Deputy Mayor, and then we'll go to the other side of the house. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Bly. It's not a question so much as I'm looking for some sort of affirmation. We've had a lot of discussion about external funding and whether that comes into play with asset management and how to quantify that, et cetera. I'm going to assume that the work that we've done over the last 4 years, thank you again, Mr. Doherty, for that, and Ms. Wheeler for pulling it all together, and that we're about to meet our requirements of the province. But I imagine that having a completed asset management plan puts us in good position to apply for upper levels of government for investment in our infrastructure. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen municipalities being denied grant funding opportunities or partial grant funding opportunities because of the lack of a compliant AMP. So absolutely, this puts you in a much stronger position for those opportunities as they come.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Strachan, then potentially Councillor Wilson, and then I have a couple of other questions. Thank you.
Thank you through Madam Mayor. So just on the point of natural assets, when a few of us on council attended the FCM in Edmonton just last week, I think, not too long ago, we had a chance to tour a good chunk of Edmonton to see what they have in terms of trees. trees everywhere, where they've brought new trees in, where they've maintained trees, where they've rehabilitated areas, where they've made them into, areas that are conducive to wildlife and all that kind of stuff. It was quite phenomenal what they've done, and by no means a small effort, and it's been going on for quite some time. A quick Google search, their urban, they have a master plans, asset management plans for all their different natural assets, urban, forest, as well as others. So I would say that it's probably a really good resource just because of the scope of what they've done and how much effort they've put into it and how much care they've put into each area that they looked at. I think all four of us went on that tour, and it was quite remarkable. So just food for thought if you haven't already seen that one. And I'm unfortunately in the position where I have to replace a vehicle right now. So it's much like our municipal assets. It's not just about the car payment, it's about the maintenance costs that come with it. And those are always the hidden details. And I think that that's where an asset management plan comes into place, right? It's not just about looking at the initial sticker price for anything. It's what does it mean in the long term, not just for the life of it, but how do you extend its life? How do you do, preventive maintenance kind of work and so on? So I think all of this is very important, and good data absolutely will get you into the right position. You can't ask for money to support something if you don't know what that something is, and you don't know its state, and you don't know how to make that investment last a long time. So I'm very appreciative of this asset management plan. There's a lot of information in there, a lot of numbers, but I think it's a great start, and I'm really glad to see that we've gotten to this stage. So good luck on the asset management side of things too, on the natural assets. I think it'll be very exciting. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Peckford, through you to Mr. Doherty. Thank you for bringing that specificity of the LiDAR and what you're going to be doing with the trees. And I think it's going to be a wonderful exercise. Thank you.
Okay, council colleagues, any other questions at this stage of the game? So I think I see that the recommendation is that we adopt the 2025 asset management plan. I do want to make a distinction, however, between, I guess, scenarios that are presented in the report around potential tax rate increases. Obviously, that's not what's being adopted this evening. The scenarios are just painting a picture of what the municipality moving into the next budget cycle can contemplate, and then it's really at council's discretion, working with staff to determine which scenario one might pursue and or another scenario altogether. Again, which I think would allow a future council to incorporate some of that additional information, which is critical context for a high growth community. We are growing. We have a growing tax base, and we have a remarkable record of securing external funding, which can offset, I think, and diminish the burden of a tax rate increase. So just for the purposes of anyone watching this evening, I think it's really important to be clear that we're not pursuing or adopting tax rate increases for future years. The report tonight by Mr. Bly simply provides scenarios or suggestions for how a particular gap could be closed. I don't just, and maybe this is a question back to Mr. Bly, I think the other asset in our community is people. And this council has made, I think, tremendous efforts working with staff to invest in its people. That's what North Granville Transit is about. And even though the capital is captured through this exercise, as I understand it, if we own it, that all the resources invested in operating that system through a third-party contract are not captured here. And I understand why they wouldn't be captured here, but I think, unfortunately, sometimes these asset management plans don't look at how municipalities are trying to balance the tension between investing in things, whether they're natural or built, and investing in people. So I think any future council and staff we'll really have to contemplate the people component as well as the natural or built asset component, because there are tensions and you can't do everything. We're very aware of that. But if we were to, say, aggressively adopt scenario one, I would worry about our capacity then to invest in our people, because I don't think in every case it's possible to do both in the way that we've been doing it. So anyway, it's just a personal reflection. Again, this is really the purview of the next council. And I just wanted to be clear that by adopting the asset management plan, we are not making assumptions about how tax rate increases are assumed or adopted in a forthcoming budget. These are simply scenarios that provide information for council. And I think we've asked some good questions this evening about the landscape of asset management and what it means for us. I would like to, my one question, and then I recognize Deputy Mayor, the determinations about service levels in this report, the assumption is they remain unchanged. So they neither increase or decrease, because the service level is a critical piece of how you continue to invest in the asset. We made a decision about the armory to basically increase the service level of the armory by expanding its capacity, ensuring it was building code compliant, having an accessible washroom. So that was a service level decision which compelled more investment. So Mr. Bly, or maybe Mr. Doherty, can you confirm that this asset management plan doesn't, it captures the service level commitment as it exists today? Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say it captures it as it is today. But when you look at your funding position, the assumption is this, that if you're moving from a 22% funded to a 100% funded position, that your service levels will ultimately increase, right? You're increasing investment, you're increasing investment, which therefore increases your performance and lessens risk, et cetera, and therefore increases that service level to residents.
And the service level increase changes how? Help me understand, Mr. Bly, just so I have a clear picture myself.
Well, if right now the funding level doesn't allow you to make timely investments, right? Whether, pave a road, for example, that service level just stays, right? If we're not increasing the funding, the current funding just keeps that asset at status quo. We can't afford to replace it. We can't afford to improve it, et cetera. But as we increase that investment, right, we have that funding, we have that strategy in play. Now we have the financial capacity to do that, to perform that event. And now we've increased that service level of a higher performing road or replacing aged pipes or what have you. So.
Thank you. I think that's clear. So by proactively investing in the assets, inherently, you create the conditions for the service level to increase. In many cases, maybe not all cases, but in many cases. So, and I think that's an interesting decision point for a forthcoming council, is by creating the conditions for more investment, you are raising the service level. That's not a bad thing. That's often a very good thing. So, but naturally, that's one of the outcomes. So I think that's an important part of the discussion as well. Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, I'll recognize you, and any other hands before we turn to the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think you hit all the points I wanted to in the question. I'd just reinforce it by saying that I don't find anything in this asset management plan to be prescriptive or tie the hands of the next council about the decisions they make. I'd also note that the data that we're working from is year-end 2024. So once we have the year-end for 2025, those numbers will change. So it's very much a living document. And to your last question about service levels, just using Councillor Strakian's analogy, if you buy a brand new car, it's not going to, hopefully, while it's under warranty, it doesn't cost you a lot to maintain.
Indeed. Councillor Strakian?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I think the point that you've made, the points that have been made about the proposed tax rates and so on, obviously these are just ideas for consideration and just to sort of game it out to see these are your options. If you go here, this is what you get. If you go there, then this is where you're limited as well. So I think it's good food for thought. Future council, absolutely. To the point about investing in people, I think this council has done this balancing act for the last 4 years where we've looked at it and we've said, okay, we only have so much that we have available to us. Where do we invest? Where do we feel is important? And sometimes it's like, yeah, you have to put a little bit more into roads because they're in dire need of it. Or other years, we also have additional capacity to say, however, we can actually afford to do the splash pad and we can invest in there as well. So I think we're already doing this without having the asset management plan in front of us. And I think we've done a fairly good job of trying to balance all of that. So I don't see it as an either or in any situation. I think an asset management plan allows us also to look at it and say, we're investing in people. We're making a choice here. We're taking funds over here in order to be able to invest in people more maybe in a given scenario than, particular infrastructure that doesn't need it necessarily right now and can be put off. So this allows us to do it in a very transparent way where we can say, you do A, the effect is B, and the years over time it'll switch and it'll change just based on, what's going on in the municipality and in our financial situation as well as what funding is available out there. So I don't think we're that far off of what the asset management plan will drive us towards. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Strachan. And CEO Dunlop, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I want to expand upon that point from Councillor Strachan. So Roger Doherty, he works with the departments on an annual basis. The departments will do their individual road needs assessments, the bridge assessments, etc. Then Roger takes all that information, Mr. Doherty takes all that information and feeds it into our asset management plan. And for the last few years, we have been using that as a tool to create the capital program that is presented to you from a staff level, be it roads, be it bridges, be it water, be it sewer, be it parks and rec. So you're right, all these things that we have slowly been creating to the asset management plan that it is today. We started this back in 2013 based on estimated useful life on age. We had no condition assessments. And we've been working towards that, towards getting these condition assessments for assets that are hidden, that we didn't necessarily know the condition. And so now we better understand what we own and how to make sure that we maintain it to the best level of service that we possibly can.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of the recommendation, I would like to thank to that end, Mr. Doherty, you've been a long-standing contributor and heavy lifter when it comes to our asset management to date, and I'm sure you will continue to be so. So appreciate all of your good work, and it sounds like you're genuinely excited about it. So that's fantastic. So I'm glad it's keeping your attention and you're able to build your knowledge and skill set around some of these natural assets. I'll go to Councillor Sullivan and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And through you to Mr. Doherty or Mr. Bly, I guess. I just want to clarify, I think it's wonderful that we have this asset management plan. It seems like it's basically an inventory of everything we have and the current state of condition for all of the items that are in that inventory. And with the potential options of 100%, 50%, or 75%, I think it was. But what action are you wanting to come out of this in terms of putting money away in reserves for replacement or repair or maintenance? Is that not an important piece of this asset management plan so that it's more than just an inventory and level of condition of what we have, but how are we going to finance the replacement, repair, maintenance, et cetera, of these assets that we have now identified with a solid inventory. When I got back to my father, when I bought my first car, I had to make car payments for, I don't know, 3 years. And he told me that I should never have to take a loan again after the first car, because when that one was paid off, I should just keep putting those payments in a savings account. By the time I needed my next car, I would have the money to pay for it. And I've kind of lived my life that way. And so I'm asking, how are we putting money away in preparation of replacing those assets?
CEO Dunlop will take that. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, the intent of an asset management plan is exactly that. It is an inventory of the assets, including their conditions and the expected useful life, as well as an expectation from a level of service for those assets based on a municipality. If, let's go back to the car, that we say that, yes, now Councillor Strachian is out shopping for a car, but it is typical that there isn't 100% money in the bank to be able to replace that asset. Mind you, that asset had not been planned for its useful life to end as quickly as it did. So the planning is sometimes in the future. So what we do is we use this as an inventory and a condition asset. And when staff come back with a budget, we say, these are the now needs because the asset has unexpectedly died, or we anticipate that it may die in the near future. So this is a snapshot in time, an inventory. It is an asset condition and a planning tool for the future. And that planning tool will be what we bring back in 2027 as staff to place in front of council with the support of the asset management plan as the condition based for those assets.
Thank you. Full disclosure, I kept most of my cars 9 or 10 years. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dunlop, for summarizing things beautifully. We will now go to the recommendation. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder that council adopt the 2025 asset management plan in accordance with 0 Reg 588-17. Who would like to move it? Councillor Wilson, Councillor Strachian, and of course, we'd like to thank Mr. Bly and Ms. Wheeler. Mr. Bly, I assume you got to know North Grenville relatively well under this exercise. I don't know if you've been to Campbell, Ontario, or Bishop's Mills, or Oxford Mills, or Hexton, but certainly we'd welcome you at some point if you haven't had the opportunity to visit. Thank you for your work. I'm sure you do this for many different municipalities, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I do, yeah. There's several, primarily in Ontario. I'm actually based out of Alberta, so I'm looking for an excuse to get out there and,
Okay.
and see some of these places that I've learned quite a bit about. And so I'll just, if I may,
Yes,
just
please.
thank you to Roger and Carly for all their hard work. It's 15 months of it's not always fun and easy, when we're filing through data and trying to understand and get information. But I will say, to their credit and the municipality's credit, you guys are in a very good position in terms of people and resources and understanding of the process. It's actually quite impressive when I look at when we pick up new projects and we see the current state of data and the current knowledge level. I would say your staff there are above the average by far, which was absolutely fantastic to work with. So
we appreciate that. We're always punching above our weight, so thank you. Glad to hear it only continues. Thank you so much. Okay, and of course we'll welcome you to North Grenville, and we'll show you many of our natural assets as much as we'll show our built assets. I will ask for any last comments from colleagues. Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? All right, this carries. Thank you. And Ms. Lee, I think we're going to take a quick break if that's okay. And I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the break, please. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan, Deputy Mayor. Calling the question. All in favor? All right, that carries. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, council colleagues. We're going to move on then to our next item, which is user fee review. And I believe that Ms. Wheeler or Ms. Martin? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report comes to council as a follow-up to Mr. Stevens' presentation to council on May 5th. It includes a summary of key items that were specified within the review. The analysis covered Public Works, Finance, Office of the CAO, Emergency and Protective Services, Cemetery Services, Planning, and Bylaw. This report highlights that the cost recovery of our current planning fee structure is 30%, and the recommendation is to increase this recovery to 89% through additional revenue to be levied by the user. In dollar amounts, this funding gap is equal to approximately $500,000, which can also be represented by a 2.5% demand on the tax levy. Therefore, while these proposed increases will assist in our cost recovery, I'm also cognitive of the effects of ratepayers when raising or implementing new fees. So noted within Watson's report and also the prior discussion on May 5th's council meeting, with council's direction, I am able to embed a phased-in approach for implementing user fees across each department. Within the preparation of the bylaw. I will also address the annual indexing and rounding to the nearest dollar as staff has recommended. So that's all that I had. So I'll pass it over to Director Martin, who will speak more specifically to the proposed planning fee structure.
Thank you, Director Wheeler. So this evening, I am here to just address some of the comments that were raised at our meeting from May 5th, where there was a lot of discussion around the increase to planning fees. I would say that in the proposed fee structure, the planning fees were some of the most impacted from a fee increase perspective. So at its core, this discussion around fee increases is about fairness, responsible financial management, and ensuring that growth pays for growth. One of the fundamental principles of municipal finance is that the costs associated with new development should be borne by those seeking the benefit of development approvals rather than the general taxpayer. When a planning application is submitted, municipal resources are required to review technical reports and studies, assess conformity with various policies and bylaws, coordinate comments from multiple departments and agencies, prepare reports and recommendations, conduct public consultation and statutory meetings, and process decisions and appeals where necessary. These activities require significant staff time and expertise. If application fees do not recover these costs, the shortfall must be funded through the municipal tax base as indicated by Director Wheeler. In effect, existing residents subsidize private development activity. Cost recovery helps ensure that those creating the demand for municipal review services are paying their fair share of those costs. When planning application fees are set below the actual cost of processing applications, municipal taxpayers become responsible for funding development review services that primarily benefit individual applicants. The cost recovery approach ensures that municipal resources can be directed towards community priorities rather than subsidizing private development applications. Application fees also play an important role in encouraging applicants to submit complete, well-considered proposals. Where fees are significantly below the cost of review, there is little financial incentives for applicants to resolve issues prior to submission. A cost recovery fee structure encourages applicants to undertake their due diligence before filing applications, work with qualified professionals, engage with staff early in the process, and submit complete and technically sound applications. This results in a more efficient process and better outcome for everyone involved. Planning fees can also reinforce the principle that applicants should first attempt to comply with established planning and zoning standards before seeking exceptions. Municipal zoning bylaws represent council's adopted vision for how land should be developed. When an application seeks relief from these standards through a minor variance, zoning amendment, or other approval, additional review and analysis are required to assess impacts and determine where the deviation is appropriate. Appropriately structured fees recognize that deviations from established standards often require greater staff review, additional consultation may be necessary, and more complex applications consume more municipal resources. This helps encourage applicants to design projects that conform to existing standards wherever possible, reducing unnecessary applications and supporting a more predictable planning framework. While planning fees should generally support the principle of cost recovery, not all applications are the same, and not all applicants are developers undertaking large-scale projects. Approximately 30% of planning applications received by the municipality are resident-driven rather than developer-driven. These applications are often submitted by homeowners and long-term residents seeking approvals related to their personal property. Many of these applications involve minor variances, consents and severances, and site-specific zoning bylaw amendments, as well as other approvals that may be associated with a property's development. Unlike larger development projects, these applications are typically not undertaken for commercial development purposes or larger scale residential purposes. At the same time, there are situations where applicants must obtain multiple approvals to facilitate a single planning objective. In these cases, applicants may be required to submit additional applications not because they are seeking additional development rights, because a secondary approval is required to satisfy a condition to address technical planning matters. Two real-world examples of this would be a surplus dwelling severance, where we require an applicant to rezone their lands to prohibit residential dwellings. So on top of a severance application, we're also considering a zoning bylaw amendment. And in regards to waterfront development, which is we often see at the Committee of Adjustment, typically as a condition of a variance approval, we're also seeing a site plan control application to entrench things such as grading and drainage, shoreline protection, vegetation retention, and environmental impacts. In circumstances where multiple planning approvals are required to facilitate a single development proposal, staff would be supportive of considering a reduced or supplementary fee structure for that secondary approval. This approach recognizes that much of the background review has already been completed through the primary application, staff are already familiar with the site and proposal, and applicants should not feel like they are being penalized when additional approvals are required by the municipality as part of the overall review process. This is not a recommendation to subsidize development applications. Rather, it is an opportunity to recognize situations where the applicant is a resident-driven rather than development-driven application. Multiple approvals are required for a single planning objective. The secondary approval is largely administrative or implementing in nature, and some degree of fee relief may be appropriate while still recovering a substantial portion of our municipal costs. To that end, that concludes my comments I have in regards to the planning fees and the rationale to go with the increase of fees, but also offering council perhaps maybe an additional thought for consideration where there are those additional development fees, looking at perhaps maybe be charging the resubmission or minor rate, which in zoning bylaw amendments consideration would be around $307. That would be if it follows another development application, such as a consent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I appreciate this. And I know certainly I was among those who voiced concerns about some of the dramatic increases in certain fees, recognizing that this iteration, I think, provides a little more nuance in terms of how the fees are applied. So I'll leave it there. I do have some comments around particular fee increases, but I certainly will defer to my colleagues to ask any questions before I proceed to ask mine. Does anyone wish to say anything at this stage? Deputy Mayor? And then Councillor Strachan. Yep.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to either Director Martin or Director Wheeler. It's a huge document, and I tried to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but I did a superficial glance at it. And one of the lenses I used to look at these fees was our strategic plan, which speaks to affordability, accessibility, and fiscal responsibility as some of our goals. And I think this fee structure doesn't always align well with our strategic plan. And there's a couple of areas that I think we should be looking at. Planning fees for sure. And you mentioned Director Martin, I'm speaking to you now, the unfair tax burden that some of these fees place on the general population as a rationale for raising them. But I think if we do raise them to recover more of our costs, and we're looking at figures as low as 20% currently that we're recovering. So to your point, I think it has to happen over a period of time, because it'll be a little shocking for people to see these figures after being, I guess, I don't want to characterize them as being low, but as being fairly stable over the last 10 years or so. So I would encourage both you and Director Wheeler to look at this, as I'm trying to, as how it can align with our strategic plan. Thanks. Just a comment, I guess. There's no direct question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Strachan?
Thank you through Madam Mayor, and to both Directors Wheeler and Martin. Similar to what the Deputy Mayor has just said, I think it would be good to see a phased-in approach. I think any of these, even if we're not talking about significant dollar value, but you're talking about the overall percentage increase, minor variance going from 650 to 1,500. 1,500 may not seem like a huge number in comparison to some of the other fees. However, it's 2.5 times the amount that is currently set at. So, phasing in maybe at, I don't know, 33% each year or 25% each year to get to that increase that you're looking at, maybe a more reasonable number. I'm just throwing numbers out there, not holding anybody to those percentage increases, but I think a phased-in approach across the board would be reasonable. Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to, I guess it would be Director Martin. How does the new fee structure proposed compare to other municipalities similar size? That's one question I have.
Through your worship to Councillor Sullivan, I'll do my best to answer the question. It would have been a really good one to perhaps maybe ask the consultant when they presented back in May, because they did a lot of that analysis. So my understanding is the approach considered a review of staff time that went into reviewing and processing Planning Act applications, but it also did a cost comparison. And I do recall when we met with the consultant on various occasions looking at, what are some comparables, and increasing our rates would be comparable with comparator municipalities such as Mississippi Mills and Carleton Place, and it doesn't put us anywhere near the realm of what the City of Ottawa charges for fees. So those were some of the considerations as to what our comparator municipalities in Eastern Ontario charging for fees, and certainly our fees as they exist are well below what some of those other municipalities would charge.
Thank you. If I may, another question? Sorry. I think it was our first, back in 2019 perhaps, that we had suggested, I think it was Deputy Mayor McManaman at the time, suggested a very clear checklist document to give to anyone who was interested in doing any building, any renovations, any modifications, or pretty much anything that was on here, a checklist of everything they would need to do, because there were a lot of complaints that we heard from people saying that they thought they'd done everything they needed to do, and then they came back and planning said, oh yeah, but you have to do this now, and then over and over and over again. So, I mean, this was before your time, but I thought there was a document made that would really help streamline the process for an applicant. Here's everything you need to do so that when it comes, it's pretty straightforward. If that document is still provided, maybe, and it's still having people need to come back to do more or check things, perhaps a new document updated might help. It would help. It would cost to give them the document?
No, with associated.
With associated costs, yes. So that they knew, and if you bring everything the first time, this is what it's going to cost. If we have to look at something else, this is what it's going to cost. So that they could come maybe better prepared and not have to take so much of the time from the planning department, because I appreciate that you've got a lot of work to do.
If I may respond, Your Worship, to Councillor Sullivan's comments in regards to information on submission, I'll quickly speak to building, because I think that's the easier checklist. Those requirements are established by the Ontario Building Code, and certainly our application forms do provide that level of detail as what's to be required. In regards to planning and development, that's where pre-consultation is actually very important. And what I will say is that no one development is 100% alike. There are very site-specific conditions that may require additional studies that another site might not be required to have. For example, if you're building along the river, you might have unstable slopes that you're contending with. So now we will need that slope stability study. But if you're building in town on a very flat lot, not a requirement. So what I will say in regards to that is that our site plan applications certainly do have that general checklist as to what's to be required to be submitted. But our development review team has been really fantastic at providing that pre-consultation checklist, so that when an application comes in, we have that predetermined. For this development, we had asked for a traffic impact study, an environmental impact study, grading and drainage, site servicing. So we know that it's really clear to the developer when they're submitting to us that they should have that. So while we could have a generalized checklist, we do tailor it individually to each application. Same thing when someone's submitting for, say, a consent. We do a lot of pre-consultation, knowing that it's going to the counties for submission, but we do identify those things as much as we can up front, so there are no surprises. I think where things can get potentially frustrating on the development side is on the review piece. So when we're doing the back and forths and providing comment, and sometimes it's really rare where they'd have to go back and actually provide an additional study. I don't think I've ever seen it, but I can certainly see through that process as an add-on to something else that's happening. But as for the pre-consultation and submission piece, I think we've done a really great job at the staff level of providing that level of detail. It's just you wouldn't see it necessarily on that standardized list, just because, again, certain developments require different inputs than others.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, maybe I can address my comments to staff. I too believe that it's imperative to have a phased-in approach. I would like to propose a 4-year phased-in approach. I think certainly a lot of time and attention has gone into how to do our best to balance fee recovery with the impact on residents. And I really appreciate it, Ms. Martin, your distinction between sort of resident-generated application versus large developer applications are very distinct, as we know, and lots of people who come forward through committee adjustment process or through planning meetings that we've encountered over the last 8 years are individuals. They're homeowners that have been here a long time, they're in a different stage of life, or something's come to their attention, and lo and behold, they find themselves before us often, in certain cases, to make changes to their property that are deemed necessary, or for whatever reason accommodate family, or just allow them to improve their own quality of life. So to that end, I would like to propose that for most of the planning fees, there is a 4-year phase-in periods, particularly when it comes to, one of the examples I was looking at is a zoning bylaw amendment minor goes from $1,000 to nearly $6,000. I think we've all been here long enough. We all, are members of the of council navigating planning applications and members of the Committee of Adjustment. And sometimes we do see at the council table minor zoning bylaw amendments that are being generated by individual residents. And quite frankly, that leap from 1,000 to 6,000 is really big. And I think, just as you stated, Ms. Martin, we're trying to create the conditions for residents to be able to adapt properties, evolve properties so that they align with their needs. And I'm concerned that some of the proposed fee increases become disincentives, if not obstacles. And to your point, often there's more than one fee that has to be applied depending on what the circumstances are. And you're the expert in that more than me. So I think where we see very, very large fee increases, it gives me pause in terms of ensuring that the impact on individual residents isn't so high that they can't pursue an application in the way that they might have envisioned. I think, yes, we have to think about the well-being of the municipal corporation, but, regrettably, and Ms. Martin, this is through no fault of your own, historically, clearly the municipality hasn't really kept up, and the lens that's been applied through the report that was commissioned obviously made a very compelling case for ensuring that more of the planning costs are absorbed by the individual applicants. But the proposed catch-up your rectification, right, of what hasn't been the case in our municipality, which is to put most of the burden on the applicant, because it hasn't been the case. The structural intervention to get us there is dramatic in certain cases, and that's why I think a 4-year implementation scenario is more reasonable. Of course, it'll be up to my council colleagues whether or not they think 4 years is sufficient or too generous. But I think, we have to account out in the community for the adoption of these this change fee structure, which reflects an entirely different philosophy that hasn't been at play to the same extent in North Granville. And to that end, I do want to be cognizant that when we're raising fees 30, 50, 70% over and above what they have been, there will be impact. And I just, like Ms. Martin, what you suggested in your very thoughtful presentation, we want to make sure that people have been here for a long time and have very legitimate needs for their property, aren't in a position where they take a pause, because that $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 when it comes to the fees, depending on how many fees you're encountering, just makes it too difficult. We're in a structural recession. I think people, more than looking for a new house, are going to be looking to upgrade existing homes. We've got a lot of flux in North Granville too, because people are being federal public servants and private sector employees who've been working from home for a long time are now being asked to go back in the office, more or less full time. They're incurring other costs just to do what they do in their daily lives when it comes to mileage in and out. I don't think that we want to be in a situation where inadvertently we create a scenario where we're not recognizing that people have invested in North Granville, and a well-conceived planning environment is an investment in them, because we want a lot of them to stay. So I'm hopeful that we can look at a generous phase-in period, because some of the proposed increases in fees do dramatically shift that burden to the applicant, and that concerns me. So, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate the comments, and I will say that when staff were in receipt of the fee review, I think our first comments to each other was, this will need to be phased in, just given that it is a significant increase from what we have been charging. I've been here for 7 years. It's been the fee for 7 years. To that end, I just wanted to maybe provide a little additional context in regards to your comments and provide maybe some nuance. And when we look at our development applications, the majority of resident-driven, not developer, are minor variances and consents. So I can certainly see how that increase of fee would, going from $650 1,250 to 1,500 is more than a doubling. But what I will say is, as part of the process, the minor variance fee is still not full cost recovery because it is inherently recognized that it's the residents who are accessing variances more than they are zoning. I did an analysis within the report about all of our zoning applications, and the resident applications that were for zoning amendments were usually tacked on as a condition of consent. So to that end, that's where, I mean, staff are supportive of, if council is desirable, that we just charge the minor amendment fee of $307 as proposed in the fee structure, where it's an add-on as a condition of consent, just recognizing a lot of the work would have been done at part of the consent process for that review, trying to reduce that impact on the zoning amendments. Outside of that, all of the other amendments were developer driven. And I do want to highlight, just for council's benefit, that the province has allowed for 10% as of right variances within the urban area as it relates to setbacks. So we've seen a reduction in setback related variances coming forward, as well as council has an established downtown community improvement plan. And we're looking at both an affordable housing and tourism community improvement plan, where further programs can be implemented to help offset development application fees, such as zoning and planning fees. So that could be another consideration for residents to access to help offset perhaps the cost of development if it fits within those parameters of those programs. So I just wanted to offer that as well as another mechanism you have available to you.
Thank you. Certainly, that is appreciated. With all of that said, and I hear your concern for resident-driven applications to be similar to, I think, our own. Practically speaking, in terms of a public policy intervention, when it comes to how to manage the proposed increases, it seems to me that a 4-year implementation plan is likely, in my mind, and again, I defer to council colleagues, perhaps the most reasonable in terms of a particular applicant not feeling the full effects of those fees. You know, you wouldn't want someone who applied May 1 to encounter the fee at $600 and someone else who doesn't need a minor zoning and puts in an application for July 1 having the fee being $5,900. I completely accept, to your point, Ms. Martin, that for the most part, those applications are not necessarily coming from are mostly coming from the development community, but in some cases they're not. So I think we just have to anticipate all scenarios, and I, at this point, would be looking for council colleagues to look at a 4-year implementation strategy, because the philosophy around fee recovery is so dramatically different than what it has been for decades in this community. So to that end, I don't actually think 4 years is too long when it comes to actually, I think then it's an incremental increase of 25% per year until we get to the 4 years, with some of the, I think, indexing that had been referenced in the report can still happen. So it's not like we don't index for cost of living or, you know, the basic inflationary environment. But it would allow us, I think, to get to where you need to go in a more gradual and less disruptive fashion. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would support a phased-in approach, generally speaking, but happy to accept Director Martin's comments in terms of the reduction in I forget the phrase that you used, but anyways, I think there are opportunities within this vast list of fees to cherry pick a few of them and rationalize why they should maybe stay the same or not increase quite at the same rate that you're proposing over 4 years. But I did, and I'm glad you mentioned indexing, because the report recommends that it's indexed so that we don't encounter these need for large leaps that we're experiencing right now in order to recover $500,000 of sort of lost revenue or to dig ourselves out of a $500,000 hole. And I think that's annual. In terms of fees required to cover costs. I am hopeful that the affordable housing CIP will, for I guess it's middle housing and affordable housing, provide grants to eliminate or greatly reduce those fees for people who are looking to develop or build what we call middle housing or affordable housing. So I think some of these planning fees can be mitigated through an affordable housing CIP if it's designed properly. Thank you.
Councillor Chrétien.
Thank you, through Madam Mayor. To you, Madam Mayor, I am supportive of the 4-year approach. I think that it would be reasonable, and if it's applied across the board, we wouldn't inadvertently catch residents who are applying for something that is seen as mostly developers, and that they wouldn't be subject to a significant jump inadvertently. So a 4-year phasing approach across the board for all fees, I think, would be the most fair approach in my mind, including the indexing and everything that's been mentioned before. Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also am in favor of a phased-in approach if it's 4 years. But I don't know it across the board for everyone. I just noted one in particular, the consent review. Currently, it's $350. Proposed is over $4,000, so that is over $1,000 increase. So even if it's phased in over 4 years, it's still 250% increase per year if it was broken up evenly, which is still very significant. So I think maybe we would have to look, as Deputy Mayor Barclay said, and maybe cherry pick things that are certain things that we would have to look at closer.
It's certainly, and maybe I don't understand the consent review too, Ms. Martin. It was on my list, going from $350 to $4,088 plus $548 per unit. So I think we would appreciate some context there. And then I'm going to recognize, would you like to speak, Councillor Wilson, before Ms. Martin answers the question? Okay, thank you for your hand. Lindsay, could you put down your screen because I can't see Councillor Wilson's face? Oh, that's right. I think if you just lower it without touching it, thank you, because I can only see the top of Miss Councillor Wilson's hat. Thank you. Why don't Councillor Wilson, you ask your question? Okay, so maybe the consent review, you can start there. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. So in regards to the consent review process, it really it comes down to the amount of time that goes into the review, the pre-consultation for the creation of new lots. Oftentimes these lots are severed and in certain cases are sold, or even if they are transferred to a family member, $4,000 for a lot really is not a large sum of money, even in the context of what we're charging now to what it's going up to. We also recognize that if there's an additional lot, that's where there would be that smaller fee charged. So say someone in town, you can't do two rural severances in the rural area, but someone in town is severing 2 lots off, they would pay the initial fee plus an additional $548 fee for the subsequent lot that is being reviewed. But it is directly tied to the technical review that goes into the severance process itself. From a land development perspective, and just it's the cost of just us being able to do that review piece. But certainly if council has concerns about that increase overall, that could be, subject to a value. I would have to go through the report in more detail to give you the nitty gritty of where that value actually is derived from and how we get to that final valuation. But if that's something council wants to consider for reduction, then that would be your prerogative.
Thank you. So Councillor Sullivan, why don't we just bookmark that because we can come back to it, and I'm going to recognize Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, through Mayor Peckford, to Amy and in general. So I need to ask the question. We're basically playing a little bit of catch up with some of these fees over the years. They've been kind of lackadaisy, not being directed to anyone in particular, but we've kind of been sitting, and these fees have been sitting where they have been, and now we've decided we must increase them. And I am in favor of phasing, but I'm not in favor of cherry picking certain ones because of the larger increase. It is what it is, and we have to pay for development. You have to pay for this service. So I'm in agreement of phasing, but the fees are what they have been set out to be. If we're playing catch up to try to catch up to other municipalities, then good on us. And it is what it is.
Okay, I'm just going to ask about another fee where the jump is particularly high, and then I hear what Councillor Wilson's saying. I think, practically speaking, applying a 4-year phase-in for all fees is a uniform approach that allows for a lot of simplicity. But again, at the discretion of this table, we can have discussions about particular fees. I know the subdivision application fee, which I accept is largely for bigger developers. But I know that sometimes we have smaller subdivisions where it's just 7 or 8 homes. And that fee is also one where the jump is quite notable, going from 3,500 to 19,000. So could you help me understand, Ms. Martin, what is the definition of a subdivision? Like how, because I think on Heard Street, there is a subdivision, I think, right? That's very modest subdivision, that modest set of homes that's been proposed for that relatively small parcel of land on Heard Street, or I think about Jack Street, where there was the affordable housing units built. You know, the difference between 3,500 and 19,000, well, practically 20,000, is quite stark. And of course, I don't think anyone would be particularly concerned about the capacity for very large scale developers to absorb that jump to $19,929. But I do worry about the effect on some of our smaller developers who do on occasion build very small scale subdivisions with perhaps less than 10 homes, and whether or not it's fair to apply that same fee structure to a much smaller development.
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. So again, our current fee of $3,500 doesn't even cover our costs for reviewing of applications. A plan of subdivision is a very intensive civil engineering exercise at the end of the day. Perhaps maybe I would recommend, if this is something that council would like us to go back and review, oftentimes those smaller plans of subdivisions, your 7 lots, are privately serviced subdivisions. We could look at a fee structure for maybe a rural plan of subdivision from a cost perspective, because we're not dealing with water and sewer infrastructure. We're just dealing with roads, stormwater typically. But we could look at perhaps maybe a separate fee structure for that, or to see if there's an opportunity to scale it based on the number of units. I would be hesitant to reduce that for our larger scale subdivisions, because I can tell you that the amount of back and forth and involvement of, especially on the engineering side, is quite significant from a civil perspective. And I think that it's important to ensure that we are cost recovering on those elements, because they can spread those costs out over those. Some developments now are coming forward with 950, 1,000 units. So a $20,000 subdivision fee isn't significant. But certainly I do hear the concern in regards to those smaller lot subdivisions, and we are more than happy to go back and look to see if there's perhaps an alternative fee structure for those. Typically what would be more of a rural lot subdivision. Oxford Mills as well, there's the 7 lot subdivision on County Road 18 that's being developed. Happy to provide some consideration around that if directed.
So maybe one of the scenarios, and I defer to council colleagues, of course, is on both. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Wilson, but just for the purposes of giving planning staff more time to consider fees where the jump is quite stark, we could exclude those from consideration this evening. I very much like the idea of separating out rural subdivisions on unserviced land from other subdivisions where, to your point, the civil engineering, did I misspeak, Ms. Dunlop?
No, I'm sorry, talking to myself, it's just the idea of small rural.
Small rural on on-service land versus urban. So I think if we were to pull that one out, like we have to, I think, see this through the lens of the applicant. And as you well know, and you have done a lot of work with some of our smaller developers, the reality is this would be a tough pill to swallow. So I would suggest that we pull out the subdivision fees from consideration this evening. I would be supportive of doing that on the consent review as well, so that at least we have the opportunity to better understand if distinctions can be made when it comes to consent review. And again, I don't pretend to understand all aspects of the Planning Act, so getting additional information I think would be prudent. And council colleagues, if there are any other fees here for which the jump is particularly stark, I think this would be your opportunity to ask Ms. Martin to bring them back separately so that we're not including them this evening if there is an opportunity to create some further distinctions, so we're not unnecessarily imposing large fees for small developments and often locally generated developments. Is there any other feedback in that regard? Yes, Ms. Dunlop.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have been talking primarily this evening about planning fees. There are many other departmental fees that, if I take this conversation and assume certain things, that we're not as concerned with some of the lesser value increases. So if, as we proceed down towards direction from council, if we could take that into consideration, if we are going to look for an implementation of all the fees but planning, bring back an implementation plan for the planning fees over a 4-year term, plus the specific review of the 4 potential changes in regards to the planning, if that could be incorporated within the direction, I would appreciate it to provide that detailed guidance.
Okay, so I think you're saying that you feel that for the most part, what you're hearing is that we're very preoccupied by planning fees, and that's where the 4-year phase-in is particularly relevant. And could we consider all the other fees in a separate manner? And certainly we could. You're right, some of the fees are modest, and therefore may not necessitate that 4-year phase-in. Or council, as a general policy approach, we just say 4-year phase-in for all of them, because all these fees are being proposed, as I understand it, in the spirit of catching us up with the activities that generally fall within planning and bylaw or other enforcement. Is that fair? I guess the service fee structure that we're speaking of goes beyond planning and bylaw, right? So it's not just planning and bylaw, though often the implications are with bylaw. To that end, maybe I think I have to look to council colleagues for their preference this evening. And Councillor Strachan, you may have a suggestion for an approach. I'd like to keep us focused on planning so that we bring that one to a conclusion one way or another. Councillor Strachan?
To you, Madam Mayor, I would say that the simplest approach is apply a blanket rule to 25% 4-year phased in to all fee increases. The reality is planning has the biggest increases, the most significant ones.
Yes.
So if that didn't apply to the other ones, I think most people wouldn't notice because the changes are quite modest in most of the cases. Some they're doubling, but it's a doubling from 200 to 400, not what we've seen on the planning side of things. So I would say if we want to take the simplest approach, simplest direction would be a phased in approach that's the same across the board.
Okay, for all fees. Okay, great. Okay, that's noted. And I agree it is simple. And if that's the direction we're going, then I would suggest then that we do continue to ask Ms. Martin to pull out a couple of the areas where clearly the jump in fees is so dramatic that it warrants some additional discussion. So that 4-year phase-in wouldn't apply to a couple of the areas where we've identified that the fee jump is such that perhaps there's room for more nuance. So Deputy Mayor.
I'm in agreement, but I would add to pull cemetery fees because ironically, I don't think the proposed changes are high enough in that they don't really address the deficit that currently we're operating under, which is, I don't know, 76,000. The proposed fees reduce that only by a couple $1,000. So I would pull cemetery with the idea of ironically raising them much greater than proposed.
Okay, so certainly, and is it the clerk who has custody of cemetery right now? Okay, so certainly you could bring back a report under separate cover specific to cemetery. Okay, so we flag cemetery for exclusion from consideration tonight, if everyone is agreeable. And then when it comes to planning in particular, as I understand it, we would be looking at pulling the subdivision application fee from consideration this evening at all, as well as the consent review from consideration this evening. Is there any other fee when I look at planning in particular that council wishes to pull from tonight's decision? Go ahead, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I guess, either to you or to CAO Dunlop, the cemetery fees, I'm wondering why they're in here, because I thought we have already we've already approved to move forward with a cemetery review, which I understood would include a review of the fees at the cemetery. And so I'm kind of surprised it's in here with planning, and that we don't have that report from the cemetery review yet. I don't know if it's even underway yet. And so I expected that cemetery review would include recommendations regarding fees going forward. So I would suggest that we remove the cemetery from this altogether and wait for that other report. But perhaps I'm missing some information. Thank you.
Well, I think by pulling cemetery tonight, that would have that effect of us reconsidering other contextual realities for cemetery, but I'll ask Ms. Dunlop to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the cemetery is twofold answer. One, we have an RFP going out this week in regards to the columbarium. And then we also have later in the year, once the clerk's office is full staff, the RFP for the master plan. So the cemetery master plan, including what does our cemetery makeup look like, the green burials, the pet cemeteries, all the other alternatives, as well as the life expectancy of our cemetery, because we are using up the small lot that we currently have. So these are status quo operations. They don't include columbarium. They don't include any of the other functions that will come forward as part of the RFP for the columbarium and the master plan. But that is a separate thing that will probably be coming back to the council table later in the year.
That being said, given what you've offered here, maybe at this stage, it's just most practical to pull it out if there's going to be a more fulsome consideration of the entire fee structure later in the year. Yes?
As a follow-up, Madam Mayor, the master plan, as well as the columbarium, look for services beyond what we're currently doing. So the master plan and the columbarium will address those specific fees. These are fees for things that we currently undertake. So I see it as these fees were assessed based on status quo operations. The RFP for the columbarium and the master plan will identify other functions. So those other function fees will come back.
But maybe what I heard from Deputy Mayor is he's reminding us of an operational deficit within cemetery, right, function that is not addressed here. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, my intent in removing cemetery fees from this blanket 4-year increase is to move to look at the fees, to move them closer to full cost recovery. Right now, they're barely covering any of the costs.
I take your point, Deputy Mayor, and I think we should remove them because I think you've identified a gap. It doesn't appear that gap's been rectified. Again, we have to make that decision about balancing accessibility for fee structure and the operations of the cemetery. I think at this late hour, Ms. Dunlap, I would just feel like it was most practical to respond to Deputy Mayor's concern by just removing the cemetery fees. Okay, thank you. So we do, just returning to the question of the planning fees where we've been most preoccupied. Is there any other part of the proposed planning fee schedule that is of concern at this stage? Ms. Martin, I will note that in many cases, the current fees are not mentioned here, so we don't always have a good understanding. When I look at planning fees under current fees, there's some blanks. Lift 0.3 reserve blocks. There's many items for which I don't think we have a proper comparison. Am I? Oh, because there's no fee. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship. So where the left column doesn't have a value, it's because there wasn't a fee identified previously. So lifting of a reserve, 1 foot reserve, we haven't been charging for that, but there is staff time that goes into preparing the report and bylaw and the administration side of it at the end of the day as well. And then oftentimes we didn't break out certain fees into the different major, minor resubmission. So that nuance has been added in here as well.
I see. So the subdivision admin fee is not something, oh, no, that is typically what we've done. And now it's been broken out in terms of the size of the subdivision. I'm just quickly scanning those blank lines because I wasn't quite sure why there was no information there, but now I better understand it. Okay, colleagues, I'm not seeing any other hands in terms of removing from consideration this evening the phase-in, other than what we've already spoken about, which is the consent and the subdivision application fee. And if there is nothing else, then we would be looking at a recommendation that council approves the proposed updates to municipal user fees as outlined in the May 5th presentation by Watson and Associates, with direction to implement fees over a 4-year period, correct, Ms.? With direction to implement the fee increases over a 4-year period and remove from consideration subdivision application fees and consent review application fees, as well as all cemetery fees. Does that properly state the proposed direction by council? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I need a seconder. Yes, Councilor Strachan. Oh, you're seconding. Thank you. Okay. Any other, so questions, please, if there's anything else. Okay. I'll start with Councilor Wilson and then go Councilor Sullivan and Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Councilor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Peckford. Maybe I missed this, but is this blanketing all of these fees? So they're all going to be 4 years?
Yes. That's
Move
the
forward.
proposed motion. Yeah,
Phased in for
Yeah.
everything?
correct.
The fire fees, the
Correct.
others?
That's what Councilor Strachan had
Okay.
suggested was a way forward. It's one of the alternatives available to us
Yeah.
today.
Right.
So that's just for simplicity's sake, of course, at the discretion of council colleagues, but currently that's the motion. Yeah. Okay, Councilor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So you're suggesting then that we remove consent review and the subdivision
Application and cemetery
Application.
fees.
in cemetery. So what about the increases to the consent review? I mean, they're significant increases. They're like, one is 1,000% and one is 450%. But,
We are going to ask Ms. Martin to bring back a report,
okay,
further proposing nuance for those particular fees or providing more
Okay.
fulsome
okay.
explanations.
I understand Councillor Strachan's reasoning to phase them in over 4 years, but there's some of them that have increases of $13 or $22. Sorry.
Again,
I
it's
didn't
at the
hear.
discretion of the council table. I will ask Councillor Strachan to speak to it. I think out of concern for time and also just practicality of how we justify increases across the board. Councillor Strachan, maybe you can speak to your rationale.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Sullivan. It was simply a proposal to do a blanket, it's simpler approach rather than worrying too much about it. A $13 increase, whether it's whatever, $350 a year or $13 all at once, it really won't make much of a difference either way. But it was rather than picking out where we draw the line to have it phased in or not, I think is just for simplicity's sake. That's all.
So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. We're in a period of discussion. The motion will either pass or it won't pass unless there's a proposed amendment that council finds suitable. So here we are with the motion as stated, and we are now in a discussion period. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thanks. I thought you'd forgot about the speakers list, so that's why I was waving. This isn't about a reduction, but I just want to repeat my suggestion earlier that when the affordable housing CIP comes to us, that it include significant reduction in some of these fees to promote affordable and middle housing construction.
Certainly, and Ms. Martin, I don't know if you have anything to say at this juncture about the affordable housing CIP.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've been trying to bring it to council, but it keeps getting pushed out, just given the pure length of some of our meetings and some of the other matters we're considering. But there are incentives that are built into the program that do certainly encourage that missing middle housing and affordable housing. And when we get to that public meeting in August, I have a great scenario that shows how that's facilitated.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, is there any other discussion this evening when it comes to the current motion on the table? If there isn't, we understand that we've made requests of Ms. Martin for certain fees and of course for Ms. Lee in regards to cemetery. So the motion's on the table. I think we all understand what's being moved. So I'll call the question. All in favor? All right, that carries. So thank you. And Ms. Martin, we look forward to a further report on the fees that were exempted from consideration this evening. And same goes for cemetery, Ms. Lee. And we will leave it there. Thanks for all of the work and consideration on this file. I know it was a very comprehensive undertaking. Now, council colleagues, we do have the last remaining item, which is a closed item section of the agenda. So I know we will consider the motion to go into closed, and then once and if the motion passes, then Ms. Dunlop will ask all non-relevant staff to leave the room, and I believe that's everyone but Ms. Dunlop and the clerk. Is that right? Okay. So the motion is that a closed meeting of council be held on June 18th, now at 9:22 at the North Grenville Municipal Office in accordance with Section 2392B of the Municipal Act 2001 to consider the following: RFP senior recruitment, Section 2392B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. So I will ask for a mover and seconder for close, please. Okay, Councillor O'Sullivan and Deputy Mayor, any comments or question on going to close? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Great. So we'll ask all other staff to leave, and I know Ms. Lee will make sure we are no longer live streaming. Thank you.